when? On December 17th, 1903, on the windswept dunes of Kitty Hawk, North Carolina, a gasoline-powered flying machine built by the self-taught bicycle mechanics Wilbur and Orville Wright took to the air for the very first time. The headlines, I think, were to be expected. The Wright brothers fly. Flying machine takes to the air, and so on and so forth. This was, after all, groundbreaking stuff, the kind of thing that had only been dreamed about until this point in history. This was quite literally the stuff of myth, quite literally the stuff of legend. So of course, right, of course their achievements made the headlines. Of course the Wright brothers became household names. Of course they did. It just makes sense. This was a very, very big deal. And while the Wright brothers and their ingenuity and bravery were celebrated in newspapers around the world, what did not make the papers were the contributions of another Wright sibling, namely their sister, Katharine. Pictured here in a somewhat aerodynamic hat herself. Unlike her brothers, Katharine was not a bicycle mechanic, but rather she taught Latin and English at a local high school back in Dayton, Ohio, where the whole family lived together with their father when the brothers were not in North Carolina, testing out all the prototypes of their flying machine. And not only did Katharine manage the household, cooking the meals and what have you, but every year when her brothers boarded a train to spend months out there in Kitty Hawk, North Carolina, it was Katharine who was left in charge of the bike shop. That is, the bike shop that financed this whole operation. She unlocked the doors, she dealt with customers, she kept the books balanced, she ordered parts and managed inventory, she answered correspondence, she made sure wages were paid and shipments went out, she kept the proverbial trains running on time so that her brothers could go and pursue their rather unorthodox, and until very recently, entirely unsuccessful hobby. And then, when the Wright brothers became international celebrities overnight, it became quickly apparent, it became all too apparent that the skill set it took to spend long hours in a bike shop, painstakingly refining wing aerodynamics, it turns out that is not the same skill set you need to make small talk with foreign dignitaries and to convince a somewhat skeptical public about the future potential of flight. And so it was Katharine who took on the responsibility for their correspondence, their business affairs, and their PR, translating their technological achievement into social credibility. So while the Wright brothers are household names and celebrated as the fathers of modern aviation, their work depended on the steady, unheralded labor of the Wright sister, whose efforts made possible those great feats of invention. And that is not an unfamiliar pattern to us, is it? Especially, I guess, to the women in the room. But to have an individual or a small number of people raised up and celebrated as the hero while quietly toiling in the background and entirely uncelebrated, you have people doing essential work without which that success and that celebrity would not have been possible. And as fate would have it, who'd have thunk, we actually see that dynamic at work in this morning's story from chapter 10 of the Gospel of Luke, the oh-so-famous parable of the Good Samaritan. So in our reading this morning, Jesus is challenged by a legal expert to define who qualifies as a neighbor. And in response, Jesus tells him a fictional story to illustrate what a real neighbor is. A Jewish man, he says, is traveling down the road when he is beset, which is a great word, and we don't get to use it a lot, so we're using it today. He is beset by bandits. The bandits beat him up real good, and they leave him for dead on the side of the road. Two Jewish men, first a priest and then a temple attendant, both walk by, they see this injured man, they take note of him, and they choose to keep walking right on by. But then a Samaritan, Jesus says a despised Samaritan, a person of a rival ethnic group, happens on by. He sees this injured man. He has compassion for him, and so he immediately triages his wounds, throws him on his donkey, and gets him to an inn where he has an innkeeper to take care of the man, promising to pay him back whatever the cost. Jesus then asks the legal expert, which of these three men was a neighbor to the man attacked by bandits? And the expert correctly replies, the one who showed mercy to his neighbor. Jesus then tells him, go and do the same, or as is perhaps more familiar to us, go and do likewise. Now, obviously, goes without saying, it is the Samaritan, the Good Samaritan, who gets the headlines here. This is, after all, the parable of the Good Samaritan. He is, after all, the one who crossed ethnic boundaries in an impressive feat of mercy. Truly, it is right and good that Jesus should lift him up as the very epitome of neighborliness. And yet this morning I ask, what about that innkeeper? This whole pretend scenario that Jesus presents is playing out in Jewish territory. So presumably the innkeeper in this parable is Jewish. And no doubt this innkeeper had a couple questions when a despised Samaritan comes strolling into his inn with a half-dead Jewish man slung across the back of his donkey, Red Dead Redemption style, for those of you who are connoisseurs of video games. And while the Samaritan does give him a little money to care for the injured man, while the Samaritan does promise to recoup his costs, whatever they are, there are a few things we need to keep in mind here. First and foremost, this was definitely not a service offered by innkeepers. Not now, certainly, and not then either. What is being asked of this innkeeper is far above and beyond the call of duty. Two, who knows how long it would take for this man beset by bandits to recuperate? From the sounds of it, he was in a very bad way, so the innkeeper was taking on a tremendous and potentially long-lasting burden of responsibility. And three, given the ethnic tensions involved in the story, that innkeeper had to be skeptical that the Samaritan would ever reimburse him, so he was taking on all of this responsibility with no expectation of being paid back. But despite all of these factors, the innkeeper steps up and steps in to take over the care of this injured man. So while the Good Samaritan is a household name and celebrated for his dramatic intervention on the side of the road, without the unsung efforts of the innkeeper who took on the responsibility of actually nursing that man back to health, the dramatic act for which the Samaritan is so celebrated would have been for naught. I suspect that if the story ended with the guy dying for lack of treatment, this would not be the beloved and widely known parable that it has become. So in other words, what I'm trying to get at here is that the innkeeper in this story is kind of the Katharine Wright of this parable, toiling unseen and uncelebrated in the background, but whose labor makes possible the success and the celebrity of the headlining Good Samaritan. And I lift up these examples this morning, the example of Katharine Wright and her amazing hat, the example of the innkeeper. I lift them up for this reason. We are currently in a moment, a political moment, a national moment, a historic moment, but we are in a moment where a lot of us are feeling like something is being asked of us. This is a moment calling us to some form of action. Big things are happening in our country and in the world, and if we want to influence them for the better, or if at very least we want to be found on the right side of history, there is this real sense that each of us, all of us, we need to be doing something. Something. But the truth is that most of the examples we have for how change happens in the world come only from the people who make the headlines. the Martin Luther King Jr.'s, the Mother Teresa's, the Nelson Mandela's, the Greta Thunberg's, the Jesuses of the world. And when those are the only models we see, it is easy to assume that and that alone is what making a difference looks like. And quite frankly, that can be a little intimidating, a little dispiriting even. It can make it feel like a lost cause from the get-go, because try as I might, I am never going to be an orator like MLK was an orator. I'm far too nasally for that, among a host of other factors that we don't need to get into this morning. But what I want for us to recognize is that that is not how change actually happens. Because for every Martin Luther King Jr., there are thousands of people whose names we do not know. People printing flyers, people organizing carpools, people marching and carrying signs, people who showed up time and again with no fanfare whatsoever, but who nonetheless made the movement move. Now, everyone gets to stand at the microphone. Someone has to show up and make sure there is a microphone there on the stage and make sure it's turned on. It's not glamorous. You don't get your name in print for it, but that does not make that contribution any less essential. I don't know about you, but I find that knowledge comforting and perhaps even a little emboldening. There is a place for each of us in the work that needs to be done. What might that look like in this moment that we are currently in? Well, it could look like simply just showing up, being a warm body at a vigil, at a protest, at a place where presence and numbers matter, standing in the cold when it would be easier and much more comfortable not to. It might look like being one of those people who actually makes these events happen. Setting up chairs, running tech, thank you, Bob. Unlocking the doors, doing the work that turns an idea into something real. It might look like holding people together, giving rides, watching kids, bringing a meal, sending a text that says, I got you. Making sure that people can keep going. It might look like connecting the dots. You know this person, you know that need, and you are the one who makes that introduction. And something that would not have happened suddenly can because of your intervention. And it might just look like consistency, coming back next week and the week after that, bringing the same meal, setting up the same room, driving the same route, doing the work that no one else signs up for until it becomes the work that everybody relies on. None of this is dramatic, none of it is flashy, but all of it is essential because this is how it has always worked. The Good Samaritan lifts the man off the road, but it is the innkeeper that keeps him alive through the night. Wilbur and Orville take to the air, but Katharine keeps things working on the ground. So the questions that we need to ask ourselves is not, how can I be the hero of the story? The question we need to ask is, what role is mine to play? Not all of us will make the headlines, but in the work of love and the work of justice, all of us can be part of the story. And in Jesus' name, I pray that we believe in our heart of hearts that that is true. Amen.